Okay, I think everybody was admitted. So, good morning, everybody. Happy Friday. Um, I know I'm very excited that it is Friday, so I hope you all are
Mhm.
getting ready for a nice weekend. Um, so today we're going to talk about navigating a change in leadership. So this is our third installment of our Common Ground series here this summer for Open Dies. And we have some great discussion questions today. If you weren't here with us last time, we kind of go over some Open Dies content for the first half, and then the second half is really open for discussion and conversation with our panel and also with everybody in the chat. And feel free to unmute yourselves if you have questions or comments. Throughout the discussion, you can also throw in some questions or comments in the chat, and I will monitor those and make sure that we get to those at the end. But let me go ahead and introduce who we have on the call today from our panel. So, first up, we have Shannon Stewart. Shannon, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Shannon Stewart, and I'm one of the co-founders of Open Dies. I'm also the director of programming, and outside of Open Dies, I'm a licensed mental health therapist by trade. And I'm looking forward to this discussion today. Thanks, Jess.
Um, and my name is Jessica Hubert. I am currently right now working on this webinar series for Open Dies. I also am the assistant director for leadership and belonging at Mercyhurst University. So love having conversations about belonging, leadership, as Open Dies has the culturally conscious conversations. Love talking about that kind of stuff. So I'm excited for this conversation today as well. And then we also have our guest panelist today, Dr. Adrienne Dixon. If you'd like to unmute and introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. I'm Adrienne Dixon. I'm the president and CEO at Sarah Reed Children's Center. I'm also a faculty member at Penn West University in the counseling program, and I'm so excited about the conversation today. Thank you for having me.
Oh, awesome. So I will throw it over to Shannon to kind of kick us off with some OE content.
Okay. So at Open Dies, we really value leadership. And one of our big things is building people from the ground up. We don't like to just educate those who are in leadership positions because we believe everybody possesses some characteristics to be a leader. And hopefully, throughout this presentation, you're able to see how you can shine in different ways and be a leader in the various ways in your own life. Because the data has shown us, especially in the workplace, that 42% of people feel like their organization isn't fair to all employees. They might not feel a sense of belonging. They might have experienced some unfortunate things such as discrimination or not feeling valued. And because of this, that might impact the way that you interact with your workspace or your clientele or the community, even. So, what we like to do is to provide some education to help organizations enhance their leadership skills and their knowledge on inclusivity and culture and creating a sense of belonging within an organization. So, what we do to address that, we create these inclusive spaces. We host conversations such as this. We talk to organizations about how you can have some more community engagement and inclusive hiring practices using inclusive language and communication styles. We talk about inclusive leadership and creating workplace inclusion, which we'll discuss today. And all of those interventions is what helps organizations enhance their leadership, and also it helps enhance the employee's sense of belonging from the ground up. So I'm going to pass it on to Jess, who's going to talk a little bit more about creating that workplace inclusion for you or your organization.
Slide.
Okay. Can you see it?
Can you see the slide, Shannon?
Yeah, I see it. Okay, there we go. All right. So I forgot we're talking about work, about the leadership one first before we go into that, Jess. But anywho, there, when it comes to leadership, I do feel like there is kind of myths versus reality. The myth to me is that leadership is just about giving orders. And I think when you have that mindset, your leadership style can be kind of closed-minded. But with Open Dies, we talk about opening your mind and thinking of leadership in a different way, taking it out of the box. And so, what leadership really is, really the majority of it is listening and active listening, that listening to really understand somebody and take in their experience and not just listening to respond. That is a huge, huge part of leadership. But in addition to that, there's some other things, giving recognition. Recognition goes so far when people know that what they do has some value and it is being acknowledged. It just helps their self-esteem and creates that sense of belonging that we talked about. Leadership is also supporting the growth of your employees. Do you support them going to trainings to enhance their education or taking time off when they need it? That would be some examples of, supporting their growth. Some other things that leadership actually is empowering others and communicating, creating a safe space. And with safety, how we describe it is creating a space that is psychologically safe, safe for me to express my feelings or to suppress my feelings if I need to. And then also physical safety, of course. I know that if I go here, I'm gonna go home in one piece, that type of thing. So these are just some things to consider when you think about what is leadership really? Is it just giving orders? No, there's so much more to it.
Yes, and a lot of what you just touched on, Shannon, is really how you can kind of create your workplace as an inclusive space for your employees. So making sure that folks feel valued and involved in decisions, if possible, respected for their views and their different ideas and their experiences. And that can really show up in different ways. Really, what Shannon was saying, just listening. So making sure that if you present an idea, you ask for feedback and truly would like to hear that feedback, not just as a show of asking for feedback, truly taking in some of those ideas from your employees and making sure that their diverse backgrounds are viewed as a strength. So not just, we talk about like diversity hires as a stereotype, not just checking a box, but making sure that their backgrounds and experiences bring in strengths to your organization and making sure that they feel a sense of belonging, that they can show up as their full selves without minimizing some of their identities or their experiences. So sometimes we want to be able to show up, and maybe we're having a bad day and we want to be able to actually express some of those feelings, or we're having a good day and we want to be able to express some of those feelings as well and not kind of feel like we're being shut down. And the ultimate goal here really is for employees to feel comfortable in their space with their leaders, with their coworkers, without fear of retaliation. So um, whenever they provide feedback, there's not a fear of, oh, I'm going to hear that in like an evaluation later because my feedback wasn't actually taking into account, or they're using it against me. So making sure that um, people can feel that they are truly valued at the company. So one of the things that we also talk about here is stress. So stress can come into play in a lot of different ways. So the topic here is navigating a change in leadership. So whenever there's a change, there's always going to be stress. So I'd like to actually pose some of these questions to the chat, or if you'd like to unmute, feel free. But what are some of the stressors that you all feel in your profession? And if you want to share what your profession is, that'd be great too. Make sure I can see the chat.
Well, Jess, I can get us started just in the mental health space. There can be various stressors, but one I would say is in the therapy role specifically is hearing other people's experiences and having your own experiences and feelings and things like that. And when those are going on at the same time, it can be challenging to help somebody manage and work through their feelings when you're having your own feelings that might be similar to what they're talking to you about. You know, they might be talking to me about anxiety, and I'm like, I'm in a real anxious space right now too, but I have to like focus on what you have going on and ignore what I have going on in this moment. But I also have to remember to address what I got going on later. So it's finding that balance of like helping the client or the consumer and also giving myself some self-care. So I think that can be a stressor sometimes because it's just so hard to manage all of that,
Hmm.
you know?
Yeah, and Tracy's in the chat said hiring and conflict resolution.
Hmm.
Yes,
Stressful.
those can be very, very stressful.
Yes.
So I guess Shannon, since you kind of jumped in with that, how would you, oh, Jennifer also said, conflict resolution, finding a balance between being open to everyone's ideas and feedback, but also following what has to be done.
Hmm.
Yes. Yes, that is a difficult balance for sure.
Yeah. And like, how do you meet everybody's needs? Everybody's an individual. They have different needs, different wants at an organization, you know? So even like what's fair could look different to different people. So especially as a leader, I give credit to a lot of leaders because you are managing so many different personalities, so many different backgrounds and experience. Like, how do you put out all the fires or help everybody adequately?
Hmm.
Hmm.
Brian in the chat says proper communication of changes in the business environment impacting everyone and the decisions being made to address. Um, Major stressor is coaching and development, making sure that you're providing guidance to those in your company. Yeah, yes, all of those are very stressful. And it seems like there's a conflict here of wanting to be as transparent as possible and trying to understand the needs of your employees, but then also having the weight on your shoulders of the upper pressure from what really the business needs are and whether they align with what the needs of the employees are is where that conflict resolution, I think, comes in. So how in the chat, um, do you all kind of handle that stress? What are some of the self-care things that you guys do for yourselves? Faith,
Hmm.
absolutely.
For sure.
Exercise.
I exercise for stress relief too. It definitely helps. It's almost like the feelings you are holding on to can like physically move through your body and sometimes out of your body. And
Mhm.
a great release. Yeah.
Spending time with family, going for a walk, yeah, reading,
Yes.
making time for things that you love. Coffee. We were just talking about
Yeah.
coffee.
Okay. I know. I'm like, I need.
Laughter, yes.
Yeah.
Humor really is like the best
Amazing.
medicine.
Yes. Look, I laugh every single day and it's great.
Yeah.
Definitely a stress reliever.
So we also talk about there's two different types of stress that we're kind of focusing on here that I think was hit on in our conversation about what are some of the stressors. So organizational stress, which is due to circumstances. So supervisory style, heavy workload, bureaucratic processes, paperwork deadlines, and relationships. And then operational stress, which is very more like situational things that we kind of work through day to day. So, yes, working through those two different types of stress is definitely something that we definitely talk about in this leadership series. And I'm going to pass it over to Shannon to talk about kind of some more specific responses of how we deal with stress.
Yeah. Because there are different ways. It's almost like there's different types of stress that we deal with, and each one might require a different response. So, in general, you know, everybody does have a stress response, but we also have is a window of tolerance. And It's really just how much of those that daily typical common life stressors that you're able to handle. What's in your typical bandwidth to manage on a day-to-day basis? Typically, you might present as calm or grounded, present in the moment, and you just have more of a capacity to respond to life stressors or demands in a healthy way. It might not stress you out too much or cause too much strain. So that's just that general window of tolerance. But on the opposite side of that is the type of stress that can really shake you up physiologically, physically, emotionally, and that's that hyper arousal. And what you may see if you're in hyper arousal is some sleep issues, irritability, mood swings, trouble managing your emotions, maybe feeling guilt or shame, having those high risk behaviors, just kind of feeling out of control or in fight or flight mode, if you've heard of that. An example I could run you through is if you witness something, let's say involving a firearm or you hear fireworks or something, that could be like startling to you and trigger hyper arousal, depending on if that is a triggering event for you. So that is an example of that hyper arousal. Or maybe you're at work and all of a sudden you have a deadline that you forgot about and you're like, oh shoot, it's due in an hour. And then, the body starts going, right? Your heart might start racing or you're starting feeling warm. That is that hyper arousal. It doesn't always feel the best, but if you're able to figure out ways to manage, maybe using some of those stress management that examples that we just went over, that might help bring down this hyper arousal. And on the other side of hyperarousal is hypoarousal. And that's that lower state of arousal. The trigger, there might be triggers there, but the impact might not feel as jarring or triggering. Some of those symptoms might look like just feeling numb or detached from things, not finding joy in activities that maybe you used to, having low energy or depression. So if you're having, let's say you're just overwhelmed with tasks, right? You have so much to do that you almost don't know where to start, or you start a bunch of tasks but you don't finish, or you just shut down and don't do anything at all. That is when you're in that hypoarousal mode. It's almost like there's too much going on. I'm just not going to do it. Sometimes that's healthy, but sometimes that could end up causing more stress in the long run because if you put too much off. So there definitely is that balance that over time you'll be more self-aware of so that you can manage it when it presents itself. Let's see, we have some comments in the chat. Do you have any suggestions on best ways to learn how to temper hyper arousal and possible resources or best practices? So, off the top of my head, I would, in hyper arousal mode, I feel like calming yourself down quickly is the goal in order to manage anything after that. So personally, when I'm in those modes, I use breathing exercises or some thought stopping exercises. You can I don't think we have them in this presentation, but there are techniques called grounding exercises. And if you look those up, they have lots of examples of ways that you can use in the moment breathing exercises to calm yourself down. I know there's the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 method where you look for example, like 5 things you could see, 4 things you could touch, 3 things you could hear, 2 things you could, and so on and so forth until you are calmed down. You could also use thought stopping. So let's say your thoughts are just racing, and let's say the thought is, I'm never going to get this done. I'm never going to get this done. I'm never going to get this done. You could think of the other outcome, like the positive. What could be the positive outcome? Like, I might have to rush, but I'm going to get this done. So instead of automatically catastrophizing and thinking of the negative outcome, you could practice thinking of the positive outcome. What we got in here? Thank you for adding that in there.
That
Okay.
is one that I use um, pretty often whenever I get in that like heightened state.
Yes.
It
Hmm.
it really does help calm your heart because you
Yes.
feel your heart beating, and when you stop and look around the room or Sometimes I even do it when I'm walking, which is even better, I think, because you're in a different space if possible, and then you're engaging your mind in a different way because you're not in that stress environment. You're changing environments as well.
Yes, that's so true. And feel like it just brings you back to the present. You know what I mean? Reminds you of where you're at. That's the other thing. Another little trick is to try to think of where your feet are. Wherever your feet are, that's where you are. You are present. You are in this moment. This is where you're at. So sometimes that helps your thoughts not spiral out of control into that unmanageable space. And I like
Yeah.
how somebody mentioned, just slowing down, making a list of what needs to be done. That lists help, to-do lists help. So another trick is, I don't know what the therapeutic term is, but I call it taking a thought dump. And what I do, I text myself. I have my number saved in my phone, and I'll just text myself all the things that are spiraling in my head. It doesn't even make sense half the time, but it's just out of here and into the universe, and I don't have to deal with it anymore. So that's a little trick too. Text yourself all the madness and just get that out of your mind to clear up some space and make room for some good information. What else do we talking about? Somebody mentioned, oh, box breathing method, another great technique to help you be more present, catch your breath. Because if you're not breathing, really, it's not making the messages are not getting sent to your brain properly. And if they're not getting sent to your brain properly, your overall functioning could be impaired. So that's why we use or talk about these breathing techniques so much, because once you're able to catch that breath, then there's, a better chance that you'll be able to manage other situations down the line.
I think also going back to those leadership practices where if you are in a stressful situation, say you have to have a difficult conversation with an employee and you're starting to feel stressed or you're starting to feel that hyper arousal and your heart's beating and the person in front of you is still talking, but you're not really listening because you're in that heightened state. If you can kind of do some of these grounding exercises, it'll help your brain slow down to where you can then start listening to listen and not listening to respond. Because I know I've been in situations where I've had meetings with students and I can tell they're stressed out. So they're not actually hearing what I'm saying. So we just stop the conversation and just start breathing together if I can tell that they're in a heightened state. And it really helps kind of bring the conversation back to where it needs to be, back to an actual place of um, where we actually need to go with the conversation instead of just we're both stressed out.
Right. And I like how you're able to acknowledge that in other people, because that's what like a lot of the things that we're discussing today is it's not just for us to use these techniques on ourselves, but to be able to recognize when somebody else, a coworker or a friend is feeling stressed out, and we might just need to take a pause in the conversation, check in with each other, and pick the conversation up later.
Yeah, and
You know?
I'll ask for the chat as well. What does it look like? Like I like mentioned that I can tell when a student in front of me is kind of stressed out, but like what does it actually look like when someone is stressed or when you're stressed? What does that look like?
This might sound so contradictory, but when I'm super stressed, it's my daughter's favorite thing is to say I crash out. I will just lay down and sleep. That's like my coping mechanism is to just go to sleep.
Mhm.
I saw earlier
I love
too,
that.
Kathleen, that you said one of your stress coping mechanisms is picking at your thumb. I I do that as well. Just start
Mhm.
picking at my fingers, and that is a surefire way for other people to see if I'm stressed or like preoccupied.
I think
I
that's
also think some of the things you guys talked about, from why you're grounding, when you're stressed, you tend to be maybe a little bit more agitated, or as Kathleen's talking about, you might sleep more. Maybe you're not as excited about things that you would normally do. So you see a shift in that. Um, you know, if you would normally go to the mall and walk, or I don't know, me go shopping, and I'm saying I don't even want to shop. Like that's a stress point for me. I know, okay, I need to dial it back because the one thing that gives me a relief in some ways, I don't even feel like engaging in that.
Right. Yes. Noticing that behavior change is like, oh, I think I'm going through something here for sure.
I can tell when I start like bouncing my leg.
hmm
Um,
Yeah. hmm
that is a involuntary reaction. But when I start realizing that I'm doing it, like, oh, okay, I need to actually start breathing.
Yeah.
Yeah, facial expressions for sure. Trouble
hmm
focusing, lack of eye contact
Yeah,
sometimes, depending on the situation.
for sure.
I think also reading cues in other people.
Hmm.
So being tuned in when other people change or may shift their interactions with you. The work, I spent a lot of time in like highly working with severe mental illness and in highly acute populations. So one of the things I learned very early on is when my children would like back up. Like they wouldn't be as engaging. They were actually giving me space and I didn't realize it initially, but they could read when I was stressed. And so I learned to check the cues with them and then I would check in and say, okay, what's going on? You wasn't like, telling me everything that happened today right away. And they were like, oh, how was your day? So
Oh,
it wasn't
wow.
the typical how was your day? It was the temperature check of how was your day. So
hmm That is such great insight, because you got to check the temperature to have certain conversations. Is it safe for me to open up? Can she handle it? Does she even want to hear me out? So, yeah, that is so spot on. And that I think is actually a good segue into our last topic, I believe, which is resilience, because we definitely all have stressors. We do have ways to handle them. And now we want to talk about, how do we grow from those experiences? How do we learn from them and truly, truly recover from challenging experiences? Because it is possible. It definitely is. And it takes some practice, and I feel like once you get through a challenging experience, you can kind of go back to that and say, I did it once, I can do it again. It kind of reminds you of what you're capable of. Not that it always feels good to go through the tough stuff, but when you get through it, it can be empowering in many different ways. And here are just some 8 steps to become more resilient because it is within each and every one of us. Where we like to start is with accepting change, having some awareness, knowing that change is possible. It's going to take some work, but it is possible to get there. And just being comfortable with change, not just only changing yourself, but also the change that occurs that we don't have control over, right? Change in leadership, for example. Maybe you have control over that, maybe you don't. But accepting that first is a great tool to become more resilient. And then continuously learn, being open to learning new information or exchanging information, skills, just gathering that understanding of something else beyond yourself. Taking charge of your life, of your career, instead of letting somebody else or something else drive that bus. You're in charge of your life and your development. Finding your sense of purpose, that also goes to feeling a sense of belonging. If you have some meaning and purpose in your life, you might feel that you belong somewhere, right? It just helps you to feel more comfortable and confident and be open to accepting other perspectives. Okay? Reframing how you see your strengths, your abilities, your skills. Let's say you look at them in a negative way, or you might look at a leader skills in a negative or certain way. Being open-minded, can that person change? Can you talk to them about things you want to see differently in their skill set? Things like that. And do some self-reflection. Self-reflection is a great way to grow, not only as an individual, but as an organization as well. Talk about, instead of framing things like, what did we do bad? I like to call them, where are our areas for improvement? What can we do better? So doing that reflection can help you get through some challenges, whether that's personally or professionally. And through that, you can create some relationships and a support system. I think many people could use a support system, but everybody doesn't have that. And we're at work so much of our lives that if you're able to create a system that feels like, feels like a family, doesn't just say, we're all a family here, but it really feels like that, then people want to come to work. And when you want to come to work, you want to do good work. You want to give your all. But when it doesn't feel that way, it doesn't feel that sense of community and support, then that might impact the productivity of employees or even leaders. And then lastly, pay attention to who you are outside of your job. So often people might ask, like, who are you? And the first thing people will say is what they do professionally, because that is so much of what we focus on in society. So there is value, though, in finding different labels or roles or interests outside of the career that you are engaged in. So, those would be some steps to become more resilient as an individual or as a leader, and more resilient when we're experiencing change and leadership.
Um, so that is the like OE content that we have. So the point of these webinars is kind of just to give a little taste of like what some of the conversations that Open Dies can provide for organizations. So that's just a little taste of kind of what we talk about in the leadership series. So now we're going to move into some discussion questions. Um, let's Yeah, I guess we can just go down the list. So Dr. Dixon, if you would like to kind of start us off with the discussion with these questions, and then we can kind of um, ask for input from the chat, or if anyone wants to unmute, then we can just have a more organic conversation if that works.
Sure. So
So, oh, go ahead, sorry.
now I was going to say the first question is,
Yep.
when you experienced a change in leadership and how do you feel about this? How did you manage these feelings? And so certainly we'll look to hear from others in their experiences. One of the things I was reflecting on this and thinking about this, and I remember, going through a restructuring in our organization, and it was incredibly difficult. It meant that there were people who had been long-term employees who had built very meaningful relationships with one another. Those relationships were going to get severed because some people, had to be furloughed, other people had to be shifted. And it was a difficult time in the organization to figure out how to navigate that and, people's feelings and emotions around that. And so that can be incredibly difficult. And that also meant a change in leadership because we were at the same time had just lost a really impactful leader who had been with the organization probably 30 years, who was leaving and someone new who was coming in. And so, of course, on a systemic level, from a systems perspective, and certainly parallel process all the way to the individual levels, is that people were highly anxious. Not just they were anxious, they were frustrated and angry. So we went through a number of things from grief process to also trying to embrace what the potential and the possibilities would be. So, I mean, I'll just kind of toss that out there in terms of, some of one of the challenges that I've experienced in terms of a leadership change, but certainly welcome comments from folks on the call and what their experience has been and how did they feel about this.
Well, I can add to what you were saying, Dr. Dixon, with my own example of change in leadership. What I have seen, this is at a couple different organizations, is that when there has been a change in leadership, I've seen a change in some of the employees in the sense that they might leave the organization
Mm.
because for whatever reason, maybe that the new leader didn't align with something within them, and it caused them to say, I'm gonna go somewhere else. and see what a different leadership style might be. And so I've always thought that was interesting that it just showed how impactful though a leader can be in employee satisfaction, even if, you haven't really given that leader a chance. They might just say like, it's just not for me and I gotta go.
Yeah, I think as you're navigating through change like that, of course, again, I just gave a overview of a number of different feelings different people felt for different reasons.
Hmm.
They were severing relationships, moving. They may not have, their values or goals was aligned with what the new leader, what their vision was. So there's
Yeah.
a host of different things, and you can be navigating layered emotions and feelings as they relate to that in that process. And so, how do you wrap your head around that I think that's also,
Hmm.
making sure that you decide if I'm not going to stay here, how am I leaving? So there's an old saying,
Yeah.
it's not what you do, but how you do it.
Hmm.
So thinking about the process of how you're navigating through this and not just the experience.
Yes. That's so true.
It looks like Tracy
Mhm.
has said it can be a difficult time of great confusion. Staff are used to one type of leadership, and then those priorities and direction shift versus what was allowed before. Daily routines can change, and it's not always bad, but it is definitely good, and is getting used to. And that's so true. I think anything that is news can sometimes be frustrating. I usually tell the story, Dave, I see your hand up. I usually tell the story that I had a BlackBerry. I love my little BlackBerry. And and they would all tease me, including my children, and I held on to it till it couldn't do anything else. Even the BlackBerry people didn't know how to fix it, so I had no choice but to navigate to something different. Even when there could be something potentially better or offer other opportunities, we can be so fixed in our space that it's hard to look outside of that and want to and do something different. Because it's sometimes for us, it's easier to wield the that which we know versus the that which we don't, even if it could be potentially better. Yeah. Dave, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. Excuse me.
Mhm.
Um, I've been in organizations that were mission driven pretty much all my life, and particular experience from early in my career when I was working for a very mission oriented organization that had a steady stream of fairly long time leaders that all basically came from the same value structure, et cetera. Um, and our board made a disastrous decision and hired someone. And within 6 months, our almost entire staff, we were all on the verge of walking out. And it was because he violated pretty much every single thing that Shannon pointed out that a leader is there to do. Um, um, and it was extraordinarily stressful. Um, but it was ultimately very empowering because we wound up with a meeting with the whole staff, our board chair, and this guy, and my fellow staff people appointed me the person to tell him that we were not working with him anymore. And even in that moment of sitting across the table from him and gently, saying like, what we're saying is we can't work with you anymore. Um, he still didn't get it. He still didn't get it. Our board chair had to turn to him and said, "Do you understand what Dave is saying?" So, as far as changes in leadership, change is the only thing that's constant, especially in organizational life. But I think that the closer people are to the mission of the organization and the more they hold that at the core of what they're doing and who they are, um, the better chances for successful transitions in leadership, um, barring anything like hiring wackadoos. But because it's that institutional ethos that is going to have more impact on on a new incoming CEO than the incoming CEO is going to have on the organization. That's all. Thank you.
Sorry, I was muted. Well said, Dave. I see Kathleen posted that they've gone through 3 different principals in 3 years, and it's very different leadership styles, and it can be very difficult, or it's incredible to see how children respond to that. So yeah, a person will have, I mean, from systems theory, an individual can have impact, a shift that way, whether it's changing it from the grassroots up or it's changing it from top down, and that push in the middle, it will have some impact. But it's all in terms of how we also comprehend it and our ability to respond to it. So do we crash out or do we embrace the strategies to respond?
Right.
Kathleen, I'm curious if there's a significant difference between how the kids responded versus the adults.
Absolutely. So forward apology, my daughter's playing a video game, so it's sort of loud. Um, just from one year to the other, like for instance, just this past month, my daughter was much more comfortable going to the principal when there was an issue going on in the classroom with one of her peers. And it was one of those moments that she couldn't say anything in the classroom, so she excused herself and went to the principal's office, wherein in other years prior, she never felt comfortable in having difficult conversations with a principal or a counselor. But also just this principal that we have now is very servant leadership, where she's empowering the students to take ownership in this, and she's empowering her faculty and staff, and she's giving parents a sense of positivity in all of this. And she's the most communicative, the most understanding, meeting everyone where they're at, and the children have picked up on that. Whereas in previous years, there's always this feeling of, if I go and tell the principal, is this going, and it was also because the principal was a parent. She had her children at that school. Um, is there going to be retaliation amongst my peers because I went and said something to their parent, or I said something to my teacher's friend, and now it's going to come back and hurt me in the classroom, which was a very real thing. And Dave, my girls the youngest will be in kindergarten next year, and they're finishing up 3rd and 5th grade this year. But just at a very young age, them being able to identify the drastic culture difference in the school, and they're noticing that their teachers are happier and their teachers are being empowered to share positive remarks with parents of like, hey, I saw Ariana do this really great thing today, and I wanted to shout her out to all of you. And it's like, I don't know if the principal was saying you have to make 3 shout outs per month or whatever, but she's definitely completely 180'd the culture within that classroom. And I'm seeing my kids come home with bigger smiles.
Really awesome.
Thank you. Our next question is, how have you handled situations outside of your control? So while we give people time to type in there, I think, one of the things for me is, my little mantra is what it is. It's going to be what it's going to be. And I can have impact, and I need to think about how I want to have impact. So I can't control other people. I can only control how I respond, my advocacy, and looking at ways that may be having, meaningful response. So thinking about clarity about what I'm doing, making sure that I have an open mind and staying focused, but Also thinking about my attitude around it. Again, am I in the crash out attitude, or I'm looking at healthy coping strategies and, still staying reflective to be able to address it. Dave says picking your battles. So important to really decide what thing you want to lean into and which one you're going to take up the fight, or how are you addressing it? It's how we respond. Kathleen says she sometimes doesn't handle it well, but I've learned not to respond until my heart stops racing. Great suggestion and advice, Kathleen. Chris says, I operate under this phrase, control what you can control. If the situation is out of your control, then are they leading factors that can be controlled? Great point. What is it that we have the ability to influence, and how are we going to show up in those spaces, and, the opportunity that we take in the midst of the challenge. Yeah. And so we don't want those factors leading us versus our ability to respond, to be responsive. So being responsive versus reactive. Tracy says, research and ask the question, as you said, know what you can control and change and what you cannot. Absolutely. That will decrease your stress and certainly, I think, increase our sense of resilience, because it gives us a better sense of grounding and appreciation for how we're having meaningful impact, rather than feeding into the potential chaos or drama that may be going on. So I like pulling back and being reflective and thinking about how we can respond in really meaningful ways, rather being sucked in to the situation. Who does have control? Love it. Can you trust and influence indirectly? Such a great point that sometimes it may be, again, I'm a process person. And so rather than just confronting situations, sometimes it's how do you have impact on the process? And you can do that sometimes indirectly. You don't have to always, leap in and challenge the situation outright. It may be influencing the system in different ways. Great points, everyone. What advice would you give someone who is struggling personally or professionally with leadership changes?
Hi, Dr. Dixon. This is Brian. My chat is not working, so I apologize.
Oh, no worries.
I figured I'd come on audio here because I just want,
Yes, jump in.
I appreciate you putting on this session. Um, One of the things that I was thinking about through all of this really comes down to communication. With
Mm,
me, it feels like everything starts with communication.
mhm.
Whether it's an awkward situation, whether it's a good situation, I tend to believe that communication is very much needed. I know we were talking about going through change in leadership. I think a lot of communication comes out of that because, as you were all saying, there's a lot of question, there's a lot of uncertainty, and I think trying to level the ground to make sure that everybody's coming from the same point of interest, or if not, at least learning what those different perspectives are so that you can address them going forward. So again, I think communication is really important in a lot of these conversations. In regard to what your question was there, how would you help somebody? Again, communication. A lot of times finding out what their issues are, where they might be having difficulty, talking to them about it. A lot of times you can share your own experience and perspectives as well to try to give them that confidence that, hey, you're not the only one. I think we've all been in that situation where we can say, oh my gosh, I thought I was the only one with this. No, there's plenty out there. It's just you came out and talked about it. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I actually was thinking about, because you put in the chat early on about communication, and communication is really critical. For me, I came in to my leadership role in the worst time ever. I mean, it was literally the height of COVID, and almost all of our leadership team, the executive leadership team, had left within a 3-month period. So I literally walked into this role and had no executive like team to try and work with. It was having to literally rebuild a new team. I had an HR director and a development person that remained on our executive leadership team. Everybody else had left for a number of reasons. It was COVID. It was a really heightened time. And so, trying to figure out that communication piece is, so important. And for me, what I learned, or what I did is try to be as transparent as possible with folks across the system. I tried to ensure that I gave timely messages about what was happening so that people felt like they were a part of a process. Tried to address what you spoke about, Brian, their fears, questions, here at work. My mantra is, it's like, I'll leave the door open. The door is always open to you. It reminded me of an old, I forget, it was a hotel commercial that talked about we'll leave the light on. And it was like, I'll leave the door open. It's always open for you to come in and ask questions and to me to try and respond. I tried to use multiple channels of communication, emails, those one-on-ones. Would schedule like breakfast with a small group of people on a monthly basis where they come in and they can just sit with me and chat. The president's breakfast, emails, and then town halls where I went around and did town halls or what I call walking tours to try and really just get and spend time with people. And that they, more importantly, that they got a chance to spend time with me and talk about their concerns, their ideas, their frustrations. And I had a good sense of what was going on, so that I could provide more, even more, tried to provide more transparent communication. So your point is so well taken.
Excellent. Thank you.
Mhm. Dave says a lot depends on the new leadership chosen. Are imposed or was the staff input value? So critical. Um, yeah, I've been a part of both processes. Even my process, I don't even think the staff had input. It was a board decision. And because it was so needed, there was such a hole, they needed to move very quickly. Um, Chris says, if you're struggling with leadership change, a good self-reflection can assist that. Is there a struggle with the leader or our acceptance of the change? Well put, well said. So important for us to consider that. And as we wrap our head around the process, it will make it easier. My supervisor always tries to be transparent with me, so then I can be transparent with student leaders. So well spoken. She has developed such a strong communication pipeline with us. So when she can't share the why, when we are doing something, we trust that what she says, the why, trust that she would say the why if she could. So I think even here is being able to trust the leader. And right now, you have layers going on, the external, the internal, the in-betweens. And trust is a huge factor, even in leadership. Do people trust that what you're saying, or do they fear that you're trying to do something nefarious, or that you don't recognize what their needs are or not on their side. We have a third shift because in the organization I have, we have a residential program. So we have every shift, 5 days, 7 days a week, 24 hours. And one of the things that I have tried to do is make a point to go to third shift on third shift rather than forcing them to come at different times when we're hosting meetings, because that's the shift they work, and trying to be respectful, that may interfere with their other things that they are doing life as it goes on, because it's outside their normal work schedule. So just even showing them contextually that you understand implications that impact folks. And Chris also says the why is super important. It helps people understand the decisions and to be a part of the process. Well said. What are some potential positive outcomes of having a new leadership or having new leadership? Mm. I always think it's an opportunity to engage in the process, right?
Right.
Fresh ideas.
Yes, that's what I was going to say too, Kathleen. They could just bring just a whole new energy and perspective to your organization that hopefully is positive. Which, of course, you never know, but just giving them that chance. It's like, let's just see what could happen. What change could come about. Maybe they'll be more supportive of employee ideas and things like that. So you just never know. So sometimes I like that idea of new leadership, just to just to have like a rebirth and that fresh air coming through the organization. It's a good feeling sometimes.
think it was Dave who mentioned that bringing in a new leader that is aligned with the mission that's already been established is really exciting too, because they know what the core values are, but maybe they have a fresh perspective or a fresh idea of how to meet those core values that hasn't already been done.
Mhm.
Like new directions, commitment to future growth, doing
Yeah.
what you've always done doesn't always work, and help you grow. Absolutely. And I think
Mhm.
sometimes I read a quote the other day that, strong leadership is not just about responding to people, but getting people to where they need to go, even if they don't want to go there, right? It's trying to help them to get there. And so sometimes a new leader is going to see it from a different perspective and challenge in a way that we become stretched or that we're allowed to stretch. And that stretching doesn't, I think about it as a rubber band. It doesn't mean that they're looking to break you or pop you, but look at ways to enhance and further develop and push us to the next level or take us to the next level. So there's always opportunity for growth. I know we're running out of time, so I want to be respectful. Our last question is: servant leadership is an approach where the leader prioritizes the needs of others and empowers them to reach their highest potential. What are your thoughts on this leadership approach? Thanks, Dave. I agree. I agree. I resonate with the servant leadership role that, as the leader, we're the main servant. We're the one who should be modeling and encouraging and developing, fostering those opportunities for people. It can be challenging, but it's also one of those things that to me is transformative, not just in terms of the task that the leader is assigned to do with a mission, but it transforms people and communities. Yes, it is difficult sometimes to let other people, but a great leader is going to be encouraging others to develop, and they know that they can't do it all and should not do it all themselves, that it is about creating future leaders. And let me see, Jen says, can you give some ideas about building team rapport when there's hesitation to engage in your efforts? Jennifer, one of the things that I have done, and this was just a strategy when I worked directly with kids. When I had a kid who was highly resistant, in a residential, for example, the kid who was property destruction or, resistant and causing all kind of chaos. That was the kid that I pulled in. You're going to be a part of the restraint reduction committee. You're going to be a part of the property loss committee, engaging them. So I think that can be really tough because they're hesitant or reluctant, but looking at ways to engage them so that they get to work with the process and they get to see that they can embrace it differently. So that's one of the things that I've done. Again, I think Brian referenced it, is that transparency and communication. That oftentimes a hesitancy or the reluctance is around, unless you really truly got bad actors who they don't have an interest in doing something different or being a part of the process and change. But typically people want it, they're just afraid and struggling with it, is to try and be as transparent and give as much communication as possible. But I also think you have to be clear that doing that doesn't mean that they always get to have the say about what the outcome is, but we can still validate them and make sure that they're being heard. I agree, Dave. That's, servant leadership can be developed at every level. Great point, Kathleen. Trust is about helping people to feel invited and welcomed and not feeling like they have to be obligated. But it's one of those things where they can be heard and even championed if that's where they choose to go and support it and feel supported. So really building that context of a sense of community and connection where they can fulfill their goals and desires within the workspace that they're in, rather than feeling like they're just part of tools to engage in whatever the mission or outcome is. That when people feel engaged, when people feel validated, when they feel part of the process, when they feel that they're doing meaningful work, that typically um, helps disarm that sense of distrust and increases people's sense of motivation and investment. How would you suggest maintaining and growing professional culture and organization while welcoming? It's a great question. It's tough. And sometimes I'm exhausted. I'm like, good Lord. But I think part of it is, for me, my core training as a psychologist, as a systems therapist. And so I see things in that realm as how do you look at the system? And so if you can impact at any level of the system, you impact the whole system. So I think also Dave referenced it is looking at ways that you can and put things in place that is helpful. Right now, I'll be transparent. Our organization is really struggling. We've seen a huge change in the mental health profession. We've seen change because of the workforce and some of the challenges there, the turnover in workforce. And so, looking at ways that we are mindful about wellness initiatives, that we're looking at ways that we are actively engaging and supporting our team about how they lead the leaders. How are you leading and supervising? Because it really starts with them. And then how is this being manifested and modeled, that parallel process throughout the organization? Because if you have a leader, and I think this is the point that Dave was talking about earlier, you have a leader that is destructive and unattentive, and you have folks who are not able to get their needs met and they feel anxious, those things then trickle down. And so looking at ways that we can put those resources in place throughout. And so we do surveys, employee surveys twice a year where we're getting their feedback. I do walking tours twice a year, town halls twice a year, and I try to do, um, emails so that we're looking at ways in which we're embracing. But I think the vision has to be with every team leader and has to be woven throughout every component of the organization, that this is about engagement of the employees so that we are delivering whatever the quality product that we are, whether it's working with people or working in systems. Those are some strategies to start that culture and model that. So that professionalism, that's in the training and expectation. We family, but we still a business. Reflective supervision. Great, great point. Um, Being able to engage in, reflective supervision is so helpful. And again, from a clinical side, we resonate that in terms of supervisory alliance and, what that it parallels the work that you want to see in terms of, from a business perspective, customer service with our employees, it should be the same thing. Our stakeholders and our customers are our employees, and it translates to the people who receive the product and the service and the community as a whole. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. That's the end of our discussion questions. I'll pivot back to Jessica and Shannon. I'm not sure next steps and how we go ahead and transition from here. But thank you, everyone. Appreciate the comments.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Great discussion.
So yes, we are at time, but I really appreciate everybody for being here and being so engaged. I did throw in the chat a feedback survey. I also have it here if you want to just snap a quick picture. to see how we did today. We'd love to continue doing some of these Common Ground webinars with more guests. So your feedback is welcome. Shannon, I don't know if you have any sign-off words that you want to say.
Yes, thank you all for supporting us. Keep a lookout for our next webinar coming up. It'll be the last one of our series. So hop on in that too to keep this conversation going. And thanks for your support always.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you
Have a
very
great
much.
weekend.
Thanks,
Yeah, we
everybody.
appreciate it.
Weekend.
Have a
Take
great
care.
weekend, everyone.
Thanks.
Just
Bye-bye.
have a quick question. On the survey, it doesn't actually leave a spot for this particular session. It only has session 1 and 2.
Does it? Okay.
So
I don't know if Kathleen's still here. If we can
she said
update
she's
that.
updating it now.
Yes,
Okay.
I just noticed that myself, so I'm adding in the option. So just give me 2 minutes and it'll be
Okay.
all set for you.
Okay,
Perfect.
thank you.
Thanks. All right, I'm gonna stop recording.
Awesome. Thank you guys.
Thank you. That was
Appreciate
Thank
great.
you.
How my best friend doing?
Zoe, oh my gosh, I was just like trying to keep her out the screen.
Oh,
Zoe, you see,
hey, best friend.
uh,
Hey, girl. Hey, mama. How you doing?
She loves you so much.